Well, I wanted to do a video of a couple of juiced bikes I got. First I bought the Ripcurrent S, and then I just had to have the HyperFat 1100 when it came out. So I've got both of them now, and I've got to ride them both, and I know kind of what you are going to like about one and may not like about another one. One thing I've done on these bikes is I've started going tubeless on them. The HyperFat is tubeless. I'm going to convert the Ripcurrent S to tubeless later on today. I like big knobby tires, and the HyperFat 1100 now has Maxxis Minions. 4.8s won't fit on the front and rear. It will fit on the front, but you got to put a 4.0 on the rear. The rear, the chain will get into the tire. If you try and put a 4.8 on it, I mean, you'll lose like 4 gears. But you can put the 4.0 on it, and you won't lose any gears, and it works really good. I'll show you, flip this around and show you some of the stuff on this. This is the HyperFat. You can't tell any difference in these two bikes. The two bikes are so much alike, but you can see how much room, and there's not much room left. Probably, I'd say 1/8 of an inch on that side, and this side's even closer, but I've been riding it today. It's not rubbing. I don't know if you can tell, but the part that's close is below the knobbies. So it's not like the knobs right here are going to wind up hitting the inside of it. So it does clear. You can't get any bigger than that on it, but it'll definitely run a Maxxis Minion. In these Maxxis that I'm running, make sure you get the XOTR if you're going to try and go tubeless, because I tried the other ones that are also 120 TPI, but they're not the tubeless ready, and there is no way to get them to seat up. The bead is so much different, and just doesn't fit. You'll probably notice I've got juggernauts on my Ripcurrent S. Those came off of my Rad Rover. The very first bike I bought was a Rad Rover, and I just wanted more speed, so I wound up selling the Rad Rover and going with these two bikes. On the 1100, I have it currently on the small, or the inside cog, and you can see maybe how much chain I have. I have probably 1/8 of an inch play, and about the same on the bottom. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, now you can. So it does clear. You don't lose any gears. And on my Ripcurrent S, I have juggernauts. These measure out 4 1/8 inch, and I have about the same amount of play on it. The bottom's actually tighter, but I haven't hit them yet. So those are about as, on the Ripcurrent S and the 1100, you really can't go any wider on the rear end than 4 1/8 inches. And I measured both of these. They both happen to be the same width, and that's about all you can do on it. On these bikes, they're set up real similar. I extended the handlebars up some because I wanted them a little bit higher. Added some little gadgets up here, you know, just stuff like that. I did put a rack on the HyperFat. The HyperFat, anything that goes on the Ripcurrent S goes on the HyperFat. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're the exact same bikes. You do get a little difference. They changed the forks. They put the Mozos on the Ripcurrent S, and the HyperFat doesn't have a name brand on it, but I actually like it better than the Mozos. So brakes are the same. I did change the pedals out on these. These are called Fun Mambas, and I really do like them. I'm using SPDs, but this gives you a really big platform. These are about $100. So, and what I want, also change the saddles out. They're almost identical, just different colors, but what I want to, and another thing that's interesting is on the Ripcurrent S, you can see how fat that motor is, and on the HyperFat, man, it's skinny, and it looks a lot smaller. It's actually larger in diameter, but it's not anywhere near as wide. And one thing we'll get into here in a little while, when I start converting, I'm going to convert that front tire on the Ripcurrent S to tubeless here in a little while and kind of demonstrate how that works. One thing though, if you notice, these rims on these bikes are double wall rims. And also, what I really like is the spokes are inset pretty far in. So when you'll see when I'm trimming the rim tape and putting the tape down to go tubeless, you have a lot of room right out here for your tape to seal. So these rims are really ideal for going tubeless. And again, that's the tire that I'm using. That's the one to get. Be sure and get the XOTR. So I'm going to turn these bikes upside down, and just downloaded a new app that I'm not very good at using. So I'm going to flip them upside down, and I'll kind of demonstrate going tubeless on that front wheel on the Ripcurrent. So I'll pause this for a minute. One thing I did forget to show you and talk about is when you pull the rear wheel off of these bikes, on the Ripcurrent S, the motor cable is actually on the right-hand side. And one thing I really like about the Ripcurrent S is they made it where all you do is unplug them. So you unplug here, pull your bolts out, and you don't even have to cut any of these. You might cut this one right here, but you just unplug them, and then your whole rear wheel can come off. That makes it a lot easier to go tubeless, you know, just to get your wheel off and tire and everything like that. On the HyperFat 1100, one thing I didn't like was on this one, the cable comes out the left side, and you'll notice this has a bunch of electrical tape around it because I jumped the gun before I knew what I was doing, but it didn't have an open plug, so you can't just unplug this one and pull the wheel off. And if you trim off all of the heat shrink, then underneath the heat shrink there's actually 3 cables under here, and I do believe they have end fittings on that push in together, just like this one over here. I do believe they're like that, but even those are heat shrinked. So I cut back part of the heat shrink and ran into those 3 cables that were also heat shrinked, and I thought, man, I don't want to go there. So what I did, I just taped it all back up real good. I left the heat shrink on and taped it as good as I could and put it back together. And the way I did this one is I cut this zip tie off, I cut this one off, I cut this one off, and you can actually leave this one on. and that gives you like 1.5 feet of cable. So I'll show you when the bike's upside down, what I would do is set a bench, something like this, just set it right next to the bicycle. Like, I don't know if this makes sense, set it right here. And then you can set your tire on top of that bench, and it works real easy. And you can actually pull the tire and tube out while it's still connected to the cable. That's probably the best way to do the HyperFat. Even if you don't go tubeless, and if you have a flat, I wouldn't go in there and take that heat shrink apart. I would, if you're out on the road, I would probably lay the bike down. You can lay it down on the road and you know, work it with that cable still attached, because I think they were real concerned about I guess shorting out in water, and to me they went kind of overboard by adding all the heat shrink to it. So anyway, we'll get back on that here shortly. Okay, I'm not gonna set the HyperFat upside down. Not a reason to, but I do want to show what I was talking about a while ago about how to set a bench or something next to it while you're working on it. This is the Ripcurrent, but here's the cables, and of course on this one, like I said, you can pull it apart, but on the HyperFat you'll cut these three, and then you can lift the wheel up out of the frame and just set it on something right here about the same height. And I mean, I admit it's not the best place to work, but it does work real good, and you can actually change everything out and not have to take the heat shrink off of it. Yeah, this tire is really close on the chain, but it does clear it. So okay, I just realized the tire that I got in was actually the 4.0, which has to go on the rear. So what I'm fixing to do is take the rear off. So what I've done now, I went ahead and cut the zip tie that was right here, and I've unplugged this is the power cord. I've unplugged it, and the other plug is the sensor for cadence and torque. So these unplug real easy. So you know, you've got this loose now, so all I have to do is just pull these off, and the whole rear wheel will come off of this one. I know I'm repeating myself, but on the Ripcurrent S, you can pull the whole rear wheel off just by disconnecting this, but on the other one, it's all heat shrinked. Okay, when you're taking the rear wheel off, one thing you want to make sure is that you don't get your washers mixed up. If you look at it from back here, let's see if I can point at it with something. Right inside there, I don't know if you can see them. There's two washers. Yeah, there you can see the two washers. And you need that spacing to stay the same. You don't want to change that. That's providing spacing for the sensor that's right inside here, the torque sensor. And then on the other side, this one doesn't have a washer. It has kind of a torque washer on it that keeps the wheel from torquing. But you just want to make sure before you remove your rear wheel, probably take a picture of it so you get a good idea of how it's going to go back together. Okay, another thing I remember now on the Ripcurrent S is this torque washer gets in the way when you're trying to pull it out. So I have to screw mine way out to the end to get this to come out, and I might even have to go a little further to get that rear wheel out. And again, there's the two inside washers that I know go on the inside of the frame. The other side's probably going to be pretty easy to do. It looks like it's probably going to pop straight up. So we'll try that and see how it goes. Okay, one more thing you can't forget about is this screw right here. This holds the, it's another, oh, I don't know what you call it, a torque washer maybe, holds it in place. But that has to come all the way out also before this wheel will come out. Okay, I got that out, and that side's going to come off really easy. I did notice on my bike, I have to pull this nut and this washer away from the frame because it hits up in here on the derailleur hanger and won't come out. So this thing should come out. Yeah. That comes out a whole lot easier if you get all the steps right as you're going. Okay, I'm probably breathing hard. I didn't want to show a video of me wrestling that tire off. These fat tires, a lot of times, especially the wire beads, they're really hard to get off. And I don't like using tire irons, but on this one I used 3, and it would be, I don't know if I could do it without them. One thing I didn't mention earlier is I'm running right now while I'm tubeless, running tubes. I'm running Mr. Tuffy's with, I think I put 8 ounces of slime in each tire. Mr. Tuffy's and tubes, and I weighed them the other day. An inner tube weighs somewhere around 550 grams. That's like 1.2 pounds. The Mr. Tuffy's, they were 230 grams, I believe. So 2 inner tubes and 2 Mr. Tuffy's, not counting sealant, because you're gonna have to have sealant either in your inner tubes or in your tubeless tires, so it's a wash. But you're knocking, and if your tires are the same weight, you're knocking 3 pounds off the wheels, or at least I am with my setup, by going tubeless. Now I know on my 1100 that it came with those slicks, and those things, they probably don't weigh that much. So when you put a big old 4.8 Minion on there, I think the Minion, I weighed it was like 1,400 grams. But I never got a chance to weigh the slicks. But I'm sure the slicks are a lot lighter. They're only about 3.5 inches wide, and the sidewalls are real thin when I took them off. In fact, I had a flat, mine picked up something like a razor blade or something the very first time I took it out. And you know, man, changing these flats on these bikes on the road sucks, and that's why I really wanted to go tubeless. I'll show you this, the way I put these Tuffy's in looks kind of jicky. I actually kind of taped them onto the inner tube and then shoved it all in there. The tape is still in here, but it's not easy to get them in there lined up just right all the way around. So I'll kind of show you what I did. Okay, like I said, this looks a little jicky, but you can see I just used electrical tape, taped it on, kind of helped hold it in place. But man, I'm glad to get rid of that. That's 1.5 pounds of weight. And these Juggernauts, you know, they're not bad tires, but they're 30 TPI. I really like, I mean, I don't know, I always like the best stuff, and I like the 120 TPI stuff. But what I want to show you is these rims. Man, this is what I like on the juiced bikes, and I'm not here to bash the Rad Rover. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention a while ago that's real important is before I put this tape back on, I clean this rim really good with some glass cleaner, just so the tape will really stick. Because some of these areas, in fact, I see right now I need to trim back across here because I didn't trim enough here to get some tape, room for the tape to be. So I will go back and trim this a little bit. But you want to clean this metal real good. Here's the valve stem hole, and you can see how I weaved around each one of these holes to give me the maximum tape coverage. And it's real easy to do. You know, you could probably cut it straight, but I just feel like I get better coverage this way. And then, so I'm gonna go back, and another thing I do is I go all the way around the rim and I adjust every one of these, because you want to make sure none of your holes are near the edge of the tape, and just get it centered real good going around. It's not hard to do. So after I go trim that other piece, get it, make sure it's still lined up. This is my Gorilla tape that I use, and I'm trying to see if it says what size it is, but I know it's 2 3/4 inches wide, and you can see, man, it fits perfect. So all you have to do now is start out going around, and I don't bother cleaning this this liner. It still has powder all over it, because you're just going to cover it up. You're really just trying to seal out here, so I don't even worry about cleaning that. But I'll start, it doesn't really matter where you start, and I'll go around the whole rim. And then the other thing I do is I go through and I'll work all the air bubbles out, and you'll be amazed how tight that tape seals over this spoke or wheel liner, rim liner. Anyway, I'll get back to that here in a minute, and we'll... Okay, this is where I like to keep a razor blade handy. Use it for cutting the tape, and I like to try and keep my fingers off the tape as much as I can to keep it really sticky. Like I said, I don't think it really matters where you start out. So what I'm going to do is start right here. Now, one thing you do want to watch when you start out is make sure you push the tape down pretty good the first 5 inches, because if you don't, it can pull, and it can pull your rim strip off or move it. You don't want it to move. You can actually leave this tape down in the channel, but it guides it around and pushes it down really good. The other thing I like to do is work it as I go around. So like right now, I've got it going this far, so I work any big air bubbles out, and I also really concentrate on the sides, because that's where your seal is at. I push it down right next to the rim strip, keep it down really tight, and man, this stuff goes on real good. It doesn't, I mean, it's almost like it was made for it. So you can see, maybe you can see there how well that's taping down. So I do that part, then I come in and pull off about maybe another foot, and then I'll work it down. And if you cleaned your rim really good, with glass cleaner or something, alcohol before you start. Man, that tape, it really sticks and really seals. I've never done this before until the other day, and I did 2 of my tires. The first one sealed up really, really good. The second one, I had some of the stands sealant come out around the wheel when I rode it, but I think is because I was running about 8 pounds of pressure, and I think I'm going to probably have to run probably at least 10 pounds of pressure. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this tape is really laying down good, and the air bubbles are real easy to get out. I use stand sealant. I know you have the option of slime stands and one called orange. You can see that. And I don't really know which is the best. I bought these stands Schrader valves on Amazon. So a lot of people, I figure if he's that big on tubeless stuff, his sealant must be good, so I bought it. Now, the other thing I don't like about tubeless is they say that the sealant only lasts between 2 months and 6 months. So that's something I'm not experienced with. So my plan is to start out with about probably 6 ounces of stands, and probably in 4 months or 6 months, I'm gonna probably add to it, add another 4 ounces, and then I'd like to get it where once a year, maybe, I go in there and replace it with fresh stuff. If you don't get this 2 3/4 inch tape, you probably have to use, I mean, if you got something narrower, you're gonna have to double it over, which probably doesn't matter, it'll still seal, but this just makes it really easy. Another thing to watch after you go tubeless is be real careful using tire irons, because the other day I pulled a tire off after I'd gone tubeless on it, and I noticed when I cranked the tire iron here, it put some nicks right here in my tape. If you do that, just take another piece of tape and put over it. I mean, you can patch it real easy, and that's the good thing about it. But I tend to like to keep the tape as solid and together as I can. So we're almost done. It's kind of making for a long video, but you might as well see how it goes. So I'm gonna sit here and listen to my cars go down the road. If I was working inside the house, you could listen to the Kavanaugh stuff going on. Okay, where's my valve stem? Okay, valve stem's right here. So I just take it a little further. Don't really know why. And that overlapped. You can see probably right there where the valve stem part of the liner was. So this thing's about ready. And like I said earlier, a razor blade is real handy. It keeps your cuts real clean. So yeah, I can kind of show you what that looks like. Let me see if I can spin it. See, man, that thing is sealed. Okay, the now what I'm going to do, I've got to get a hole for my, right here is where my valve core goes. I don't know the best way to do this. I usually take like an ice pick in the very center, and then I take either a pencil or a punch or something that's, you know, shaped like that, and I push it down in there and just kind of ream it just a little. And then after that, you just stick one of these down in it, tighten it down on the other side, and it's ready to put the tire on. So I'll take a break, figure out what I want to go. Okay, now we're ready to do the valve stem. This is the way I'm going to do it. Again, man, I'm no expert at this, but this is just how I go about it. I don't know if you can see that or not. But I'm going to take a nail in the very center of the valve stem hole and poke a hole through it. And then what I'm going to use, I've got this punch, and I'm going to push it down through there, and just not too much, but I'll push it all the way in, kind of twist it to get it out. You can see it made a little hole through it. It looks pretty clean. You take your valve stem, take the nut off of it first, and shove your valve stem through it. It seals up pretty good, and as you tighten it, it pushes it down in there. And I would imagine also sealer gets on it and helps seal it up. But so we're going to tighten that down. And I've noticed if you push on it with your thumb from the top, you can tighten it a lot more. And then I usually give it a little bit more with a pair of pliers. Now, I don't know if you can over tighten this or not, because you don't want to deform the gasket. But my opinion is it needs to be pretty tight, or that's where a leak could occur. So anyway, there you go. I'm gonna wrestle this tire on. Now, another thing about these tires, these things are high dollar, and they have, I guess, a special bead. I can't really tell much of a difference in the bead, but I know when I tried to put, this is the XOTR. I had the Minion 4.8s. This is a 4.0, but I had the 4.8s, and I tried to mount them tubeless on a Rad Rover, and there was no way. It seemed like the inside diameter of the bead was bigger. And this bead, you almost have to have tire irons to get it on. And I hate to say it, they tell you don't use tire irons with these, but I work it on as best as I can. Okay, I'll have to admit that was the easiest I've ever mounted a tire. What I've noticed when you're working a tire on, and I know a lot of y'all know this, but I'm going to say it anyway, and when you've got your tire irons up here and everything's tight, what you need to do down here is push the bead in all the way around, push that bead in, and that'll loosen up the top where you don't have to cram the thing on with tire irons. It'll make it a whole lot easier. Also, what I do is I go around the tire, and I'm actually pulling out with these fingers. I'm pulling the bead out to try and seat it while I'm kind of pushing in the middle. I've already gone all the way around this. You can see, man, that bead is already, looks like it's in there. In fact, I'm gonna try and seat this tire. Normally I pull the valve stem out so I can get a higher volume in there, but the last one seated up so easy, I'm gonna just try it with a regular old air tank. And this thing's got 100 pounds of pressure in it, but maybe I can do this when a car's not coming by, and we'll see if we can hear the thing seat up. Well, looks like we got plenty of cars. Here it goes. Look at that. it's already seated. I mean, yeah. I usually like to put quite a bit. Man, that's amazing that you don't even have to pull the valve stem out. I'm gonna put more pressure in it. That's probably about 30 pounds, I think. So man, there it is. I mean, that thing is tubeless. Now, what I gotta do now, I usually let it sit. I put about 30 pounds in it. This tire's rated at 30 pounds. And I let it sit for a little while, and I like to just kind of monitor for the hell of it, the pressure, just see if it's losing any pressure. I'm sure it is without sealant in it. It probably has some places in it where maybe around the valve stem where it needs some sealant. But what I'll do next is after it sits for a while, I'll pull the valve stem out and I'll put some stands in it, and then I'll just roll it around. I mean, you try and cover everything in there with stands. And that's what I did with my first one, and man, it turned out really good. So I'll come back in a minute and we'll put some stands in it. Okay, another thing, a lot of people do this different. A lot of people will pour the stands in before they mount the tire. I don't do that because I always think, man, if I screw up, I'm gonna have that stuff everywhere. So what I do is I seat the tire like I did, make sure everything looks good, and then I pull the core out and pour the stands in. So I'll let you see, maybe you can see it from there, how I do this. Go ahead and pull that core out. Okay. And I bought one of these things. It's kind of handy. It's a stands deal made for this. And it'll screw on there. Just kind of keeps it all pretty clean. Kind of weird way to have to get it to screw on, but. And then I don't really use the syringe except at the very end. So what I do is I tilt it down. And then, I don't know if you're supposed to shake this stands up or not, but I do. This is a 2-ounce syringe, so I make sure it doesn't have any kinks in it. And well, I'm back. I wasn't going to tell you what I did. Some of y'all may have caught it, but earlier when I was going to mount that tire on my rear wheel, I mounted it on the front and put all that stands in it, had it all finished, everything. And then I turned around and saw that other rear wheel sitting there, and I thought, okay. So I had to pull the wheel off. When I did it, one thing I noticed, and it was a good experience, I got like a 1-gallon pitcher, and I took half the bead off, and I tilted the tire up and just poured the stands out, and it went real easy. So I didn't waste any stands, good thing, because I don't have any more. But anyway, I did wind up getting it on the right wheel, and I got it put back together. There's my front wheel that I originally had the tire on. I got it all cleaned up, and it's ready to go when I get the 4.8 in, but this 4.0 is not what I wanted on the front. So let me, I went ahead and put it in my innermost gear, and you can see maybe, let me see. Yeah, you can barely see how much clearance I have. Anyway, it's got about a 8 top and bottom. I think the bottom may have more clearance. I don't know if you can see it, but it's got plenty of clearance, so it is going to work fine on this one. I knew it worked on the 1100, but you never know if your frame is slightly built different or whatever. But anyway, that's and this one, I mean, it popped right out, and you know, without even having to pull the valve core out. I mean, these tires mount real good on these rims. But anyway, next thing I'm going to do, I get my 4.8 in probably tomorrow, UPS, and I'll finish that. If anybody has any questions, or I mean, this has probably been a long video, but at least you see everything I went through. But if you do, maybe you can comment or something on YouTube. Adios.